Thank you, Megan. For those of us in the climate movement, there is only one Bill, last name no needed. Bill has been a leader in the most prolific and respected journalist covering the climate emergency for over 30 years. He recognized early on that climate solution must be just and equitable, and that they need to protect our health, drive our economy, and dismantle racism. We need him now more than ever. Bill, how are you doing? Welcome. I hope you're feeling better from the bicycle accident that you had.
Yes, Vanessa, what a pleasure to be with you and to see you. Bicycles are excellent for carbon emissions, but everybody wear your helmet. That's all I can say.
Well, it's good that you're okay and that you are recovering. Okay, so let's get to the questions. So a lot of people are saying that we are in a climate endgame now. Basically, we must address it in a transformational way, or we will suffer severe consequences. I know that you have been working on the climate emergency for a very long time. So what are your thoughts on this? And what should we do in order to address climate change in all the aspects, in all the fronts that we have in front of us?
Well, Vanessa, you're absolutely right. We've reached the last moments when it's really going to be possible to affect the outcome, I think. You know, thanks to the disinformation campaign that the fossil fuel industry mounted, we've wasted 30 years. So we're going to have to compress what should have been 40 years of work into a single decade. And that's going to be very, very difficult. The only pieces of good news are, one, there's now a big global movement demanding that our leaders move fast, so that always helps in politics. And two, the engineers have really done their job. As you know, the price of solar power and wind power has just plummeted in the last decade. It's now the cheapest way to generate electricity around the world. So if we wanted to move fast, we could. And that's what we're going to find out. We're going to be pressed to do it by the daily toll now of climate crisis around the world. We've obviously waited too long to prevent real damage. And every day, those pictures come in from someplace on our planet, whether it's Mumbai flooded, as it's never been before, whether it's massive forest fires in Australia or California, wherever it is, the damage is already underway. What we're going to find out now is whether we can arrest that damage before it really undermines our ability to have civilizations like the ones we're used to.
Yes, I was just reading yesterday an article that you wrote that is called 130 Degrees. And I love the idea that you talk about that with everything that is going on with this pandemic, basically we have seen the fragility of our societies and that everything can just stop suddenly. So do you think that everything that is happening today with the coronavirus is somehow helping all of us to pause and rethink the relationship that we have with nature?
So Vanessa, I think there's a few things going on with the pandemic that are kind of interesting in regard to climate. I mean, it does feel in a way as if it's almost a kind of practice run for the crises that we're going to be enduring as this century wears on. And I think we probably should take three lessons from it anyway. One, physical reality is actually real. With the pandemic, it doesn't matter if the president gets up and tells us it's going away. It doesn't go away. I mean, you have to wear a mask. The limits are set by the microbe, not by what we want. In just the same way that the carbon dioxide molecule is setting the limits for what we can and can't do on climate change. Second thing is, and it's a kind of corollary to that first one, it turns out that speed really matters. Look around the world. South Korea and the US had their first case of coronavirus on the same day in January. The South Koreans went right to work and they basically licked the problem. The US dithered and, fooled around and whatever, and now we're in a horrible place. Our economy's shot, we've got big piles of dead bodies, it's horrible. Well, there couldn't be a clearer analogy to the climate crisis. Uh, you know, just as we wasted the winter on the microbe, we wasted the last 30 years on climate. So now we have to move with huge speed. But the third lesson from the pandemic, and I think it may be the most important one, is solidarity really matters. You know, we've lived I'm old, you know, I've lived most of my political life in the shadow of Ronald Reagan and of the idea that markets were going to solve all problems and that if people just worked on getting rich themselves, that, you know, what did Reagan, what was his famous laugh line in his speeches? It was always, the 9 scariest words in the English language are, I'm from the government and I'm here to help. You know, ha ha ha. It turns out the scariest words in the English language are, we've run out of ventilators, or the hillside behind your house is on fire. And those aren't things that you can solve one person at a time. Those are things that are functioning governments, working societies to deal with them. So let's hope that we can figure out how to make, how to get that back. I mean, the climate crisis can't be solved unless we have real solidarity, not only within our country, but around the world.
Totally, totally. Moving to a different subject. In the past, the more apparent climate change becomes, the more pushback we get from well-funded deniers. They fairly successfully store ambitious solutions and sweep their environmental injustices under the rug. But it seems to be different now. Oil companies are writing off assets, the natural gas industry is going bankrupt, and renewables keep getting cheaper. What is happening? Are things different now?
Well, what a good question. And I mean, this is one of these issues that Eco America and others have been working on for so long. But you're right, we are seeing shifts and changes. Just last week, BP became the first of the oil super majors to say, you know what, we're going to cut production of oil and gas 40% in the next decade. Our business is switching. If we're going to have any hope of remaining a giant corporation, we're going to have to learn how to do renewable energy. That's been less true in the United States because the Trump administration has continued to provide political cover to the fossil fuel industry. But if he loses, that cover is going to evaporate, and it's going to be clear that Exxon and Chevron and others are in the same position as BP. What's happening here is a kind of pincers movement. On the one hand, the oil industry faces this big movement based around the fact that their product is now destroying the planet. So there's going to be ever increasing pressure regulatory pressure on them. But on the other side of the pincer, you know, people have figured out how to use the sun and the wind to make cheaper and cleaner power. Somebody's come up with a better product than what they have. So all they can try to do is drag their heels and slow down this transition that everybody knows is coming. And that's why what BP did last week was interesting. The oil companies have been saying over and over again, oh, well, here's our plan for 2050. 2050 is a long time away in climate terms. But BP finally knuckled under and said, look, we're going to dramatically change our business by 2030, which actually is the last conceivable date that we should be talking about here. I mean, look, as you point out, I wrote the first book about this back in 1989. So really, you know, 1990 or 2000 or 2010 would have been better dates than 2030, but 2030 is better than 2050.
Of course, you're absolutely right. And you're right in the fact that, I mean, economics is at the end of the day what is going to define our future. So yes, it's wonderful that renewables are getting cheaper. We seem to be making great progress on climate solutions. We're shutting down more fossil fuel utility plants that we're building. And we are seeing our new electricity that is coming from renewables. We're moving toward more cars. We have Tesla, that is an amazing company. So we seem to be making great progress. What is missing?
Well, it's all about pace. It's all about how fast we can go. We're in a race now. And And the problem with climate change, the thing that always scared me about it, is it's really the first timed test that human beings have dealt with. Most of our political issues and problems we just keep coming back to over and over and over again. And we make a little bit of progress, and then a few years later, we make a little more, and so on and so forth. Climate change isn't like that. If we don't solve it soon, we don't solve it. I mean, once the Arctic's melted, no one has a plan for refreezing it. We're playing with huge physical systems. It's not like, in Washington, we're used to saying, well, it's a big debate between Republicans and Democrats, or industry and environmentalists, or something like that. But climate change is a debate between human beings and physics. And physics doesn't care. Physics is going to do what it's going to do. It doesn't matter what presidential election cycle or what the recession is like, or whatever else. Our job is to meet the physics sets.
Now that you're talking about elections, the one that is coming up in a couple of months, we always think that election time is so important, and we talk about this as the most important election. But this is truly the most important election. Why? Why? Could you tell us why, Bill?
Well, I mean, look, it turns out that having an idiot run your country is a bad idea. I mean, this was very clear around things like climate change when the U.S. pulled out of the Paris Climate Accords, the only nation on Earth unwilling to participate in the effort to solve it. But it became completely clear when we got to the coronavirus pandemic. I mean, calling climate change a hoax was stupid, but it didn't bite you immediately. Calling the coronavirus a hoax has landed tens of thousands of people in the cemetery. It's landed tens of millions of people in the unemployment lines. So it's really time for the adults to take over again in our country, and at least stop doing profoundly stupid things. Even if you're not going to do great things, at least don't make things worse than they have to be.
It's going to be definitely a very, very important election, especially because scientists have given us just 10 years to really turn back our economy and cut our emissions radically.
That's right. We're out of presidential election cycles. There's no more time to kind of fool around. So I think everyone's going to get serious this November.
If you have an advice to give the people that are listening to us today, what could be the most meaningful contribution that they could do to protect our planet?
So at this point, as you know, Vanessa, we're not going to solve this one Tesla at a time, one vegan dinner at a time. The math is just too far out of control for that. Those things are important, but the most important thing an individual can do is be a little less of an individual. It's to join together with others in movements big enough that actually you can change the political and economic ground rules. That's why we started 350.org, and that's why we're so thrilled to see things like the Sunrise Movement and Extinction Rebellion and Fridays for the Future, the high school kids across the world who have risen up with Greta Thunberg, but with a million other Greta Thunbergs in every continent to really demand profound change. That's what's going to get it done, that kind of unrelenting pressure.
Absolutely. I think it's important to remember that today we have the technology, we have the resources, and we definitely have the will of the people. I mean, we see it on the streets, we see it on the voices of the youth, and we see it in organizations like Eco America and like the one that you lead. So I want to thank you so much, Bill, for all the work that you do and for doing such an important, meaningful, and powerful job when it comes to the environment.
And Vanessa, I just want to, in turn, thank you. The work that you're doing as a journalist is so important, and especially in reminding us that this is an issue above all of justice. Even more than an issue of science or economics or politics, it's an issue of justice, and we need constantly to remember that the people who did the least to cause climate change are the ones who feel its effects first and hardest. So thank you for your groundbreaking work.
Thank you, thank you. Thank you so much, Bill, and I hope that you recover very soon.
Thank you.
Wonderful. Okay, now we are going to get back to driving change in the health section.